The ice was forming faster than I could shovel, and my driveway in Aurora, Colorado, looked like a skating rink when I noticed Brenda Palmer standing at the end of my property, with her phone pointed at my garage. I had lived in Meadowbrook Hills for 3 years, and in that time, I had learned that Brenda, the HOA president, had an uncanny ability to show up at the worst possible moments. She was 52, wore her blonde hair in that specific cut that screamed middle management, and had a clipboard permanently attached to her hip like some kind of corporate appendage. "Morning, Brenda," I called out, not bothering to hide my exhaustion. It was barely 7 in the morning, and I had already been outside for an hour trying to make my driveway safe before heading to work. She lowered her phone but kept that tight smile plastered across her face. "Matthew Quincy, I need to discuss something with you." I leaned on my shovel, already feeling the conversation heading somewhere unpleasant. "What's up?" "Those." She pointed at the bucket of ice melt pellets sitting near my garage door. "Those are not approved by the HOA for use in our community." I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "You're telling me ice melt isn't approved?" "That specific type," she said, walking closer with careful steps on the icy ground. "Our approved list specifies rock salt only. Those pellets could be anything." "They're calcium chloride pellets," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "They work better in extreme cold than regular rock salt. It's -5 degrees out here, Brenda. Rock salt barely works at these temperatures." She pulled out her actual clipboard from under her puffy jacket. Of course she had brought it. "According to our community guidelines, Section 12, Paragraph 4, only approved de-icing materials may be used on property surfaces visible from the street. You need to submit a request for approval of any alternative products." I stood there, my fingers going numb despite my gloves, watching this woman tell me I needed permission to keep my driveway safe. "How long does approval take?" 4 to 6 weeks, typically. "The board meets monthly, and we need time to review the product specifications, environmental impact studies, and consult with our legal team." "Brenda, it's January in Colorado. I need to melt ice now, not in 6 weeks when we're halfway through February." She made a note on her clipboard. "I understand your frustration, but rules are rules, Matthew. They exist for everyone's benefit. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to cease using those pellets immediately and switch to the approved rock salt." I wanted to argue more, but I was already late for work. "Fine. Whatever. I'll get rock salt." "Actually," she said, and my stomach dropped at that word, "I'm going to need to confiscate those pellets. We can't risk you using them while your approval request is pending. You want to take my ice melt." "It's for the good of the community," she said, reaching for the bucket. I stepped between her and my property. "No, you're not taking my stuff, Brenda. That's theft." Her expression hardened. "According to our HOA bylaws, which you agreed to when you purchased your home, the board has the right to remove any non-compliant materials from properties to maintain community standards. You can either hand them over voluntarily, or I can have the board vote on sanctions." I knew the bylaws. I had read them when I bought the house, though admittedly not as carefully as I should have. The HOA in Meadowbrook Hills had a reputation for being strict, but the house had been perfect for my needs, and I had convinced myself it wouldn't be that bad. I was learning exactly how wrong I had been. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, but I grabbed the bucket and shoved it toward her. "Take them. But I want it on record that I'm doing this under protest, and I expect that bucket back when this nonsense is resolved." Brenda took the bucket with both hands, grunting slightly at the weight. "Your concerns are noted. Have a good day, Matthew." I watched her walk away, carrying my 40-pound bucket of ice melt like some kind of trophy. My neighbor, Frank, was scraping ice off his windshield and gave me a sympathetic look. "Let me guess," he called over. "Brenda." She took my ice melt. She made me repaint my mailbox because the red was too bright, cost me $300. Frank shook his head. "Welcome to the neighborhood." I spent the rest of that day fuming. At work, I could barely concentrate on my job as a software developer. My boss asked me twice if I was okay, and I had to explain that I was having HOA problems, which led to him sharing his own horror stories about his previous neighborhood's association. It seemed everyone had an HOA nightmare story, yet somehow these organizations kept existing. That evening, I stopped at the hardware store and bought rock salt as demanded. The cashier, an older guy named Tom who had helped me countless times, noticed my sour mood. "You look like someone kicked your dog," he said while scanning the bag. "HOA took my calcium chloride pellets." Tom's eyes widened. "The good stuff? Why? Not on their approved list. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week, and I work retail." Tom loaded the rock salt into my cart. "You know this stuff barely works below 15 degrees, right?" "I know. But apparently, I need permission to use effective ice melt in my own driveway." "Your HOA president wouldn't happen to be a blonde lady, 50s, looks like she asks for managers. Brenda Palmer." "You know her?" Tom laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "She was in here last week trying to return paint without a receipt, then threatened to report us to the Better Business Bureau when I said no." "Yeah, I know her." I loaded the salt into my car and drove home, already dreading the next snowfall. Aurora had been getting hammered with winter storms all January, and the forecast showed another system moving in by the weekend. When I got home, I noticed something odd. My driveway, which I had shoveled that morning, had been salted, but I hadn't put any salt down. I parked on the street and walked up to investigate. Sure enough, someone had spread rock salt across my driveway, but they had done a terrible job. It was clumped in some areas and completely absent in others. A note was taped to my front door. "Dear homeowner, as you are not in compliance with community standards, the HOA took the liberty of treating your driveway with approved materials. The cost of this service, $45, will be added to your monthly HOA dues. Thank you for your cooperation. Brenda Palmer, HOA President." I crumpled the note and went inside. My wife, Wendy Vincent, looked up from her laptop where she was working on her graphic design projects. "You look ready to murder someone," she observed. "Brenda confiscated my ice melt this morning, charged us $45 to poorly salt our driveway, and now we're stuck using ineffective rock salt for the rest of winter." I collapsed onto the couch. "I'm losing my mind, Wendy." My wife had taken my last name when we married, but she still used her maiden name professionally. She closed her laptop and came to sit next to me. "What do you mean confiscated?" I explained the whole morning encounter. Wendy's expression grew darker with each detail. "She can't just take your property," Wendy said. "That's not how HOAs work. They can fine you, they can put liens on the house if you don't pay, but they can't just walk onto our property and take things." She said it's in the bylaws. Then the bylaws are illegal. HOA rules can't supersede actual law, Matt. Wendy grabbed her laptop again. "I'm looking this up." While she researched, I made dinner, stress cooking my way through a pasta dish that neither of us would really taste. By the time the food was ready, Wendy had filled 3 pages with notes. "Okay, so here's the deal," she said, sitting at the kitchen table with her notes spread out. "HOAs can enforce architectural guidelines and community standards, but they absolutely cannot seize property without going through proper legal channels." What Brenda did this morning was theft, plain and simple. "So what do we do?" "First, You send her a certified letter demanding the return of your property within 7 days. Second, we file a complaint with the state. Colorado has a HOA information and resource center that handles this kind of thing. Third, if she doesn't return it, we call the police and report the theft. I sat down across from her. Won't that just make things worse? We have to live here. Matt, we can't let her just take our stuff. Today it's ice melt. Tomorrow it's what? Our patio furniture because she doesn't like the color. Where does it end? She was right, of course. I spent the evening drafting the letter while Wendy looked up the contact information for the State Resource Center. By the time we went to bed, I had a formal demand for return of property ready to mail in the morning. The weekend arrived with another snowstorm, just as predicted. 6 inches fell overnight, and I was out at dawn clearing the driveway again. The rock salt I spread barely made a dent in the ice. I watched it sit on top of the frozen surface, doing almost nothing, while I knew my calcium chloride pellets would have melted through it within an hour. Frank came out to clear his own driveway and wandered over. "How's the rock salt working?" "It's not." I kicked at a chunk of ice. "This is dangerous. My wife nearly fell yesterday." "You should see the community Facebook page," Frank said. "Everyone's complaining about the extreme cold, and half the neighborhood has ice-covered driveways because rock salt doesn't work in this weather." But Brenda keeps deleting posts about alternative de-icing products. "There's a Facebook page. Oh man, you're not in it. It's wild. People are furious." Frank pulled out his phone and showed me. The Meadowbrook Hills community group had over 200 members, and the recent posts were exactly as he described. People complaining about ineffective rock salt, posts getting deleted, and Brenda responding to everything with "please refer to the community guidelines." "Can you add me?" I asked. "Sure thing." By that afternoon, I was approved to join the group, and I immediately understood why Frank found it so entertaining. It was a war zone. Brenda and 2 other board members, Linda and Susan, were in a constant battle with homeowners over various issues. Someone had planted the wrong shade of roses. Someone else had the wrong style of house numbers. Another person had left their trash cans visible from the street for 20 minutes past the pickup time. But the hot topic was definitely the ice melt situation. I decided to post my own experience, keeping it factual and unemotional. This morning, HOA President Brenda Palmer confiscated my calcium chloride ice melt pellets, stating they weren't on the approved list. I've since sent a certified letter requesting their return. Has anyone else experienced property seizure by the HOA? The responses came fast. "She took my garden gnome last month. They made me remove my basketball hoop." "Brenda told me my Christmas wreath was too large and threatened to remove it herself." Then someone named Patricia commented, "Those pellets you mentioned, were they in a white bucket?" "Yes," I replied. "I saw Brenda using something from a white bucket on the walking trail behind the community center yesterday. She was spreading it on the path." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure it was the same bucket?" "Pretty sure. White plastic, about 5 gallons, looked heavy." I grabbed my coat and headed out. The walking trail was only 3 blocks away, a paved path that wound through a small park area and connected several streets in the neighborhood. When I reached it, I could see fresh pellets scattered across the path, melting through the ice much more effectively than the rock salt on everyone's driveways. My pellets. My calcium chloride pellets that were supposedly so dangerous and unapproved that they had to be confiscated. Brenda was using them on the community trail. I took photos with my phone, making sure to capture the type of pellets clearly visible on the dark pavement. Then I walked further down the trail, following the treated path. It led all the way to the community center, a small building that housed the HOA office and a meeting room. The white bucket was sitting right outside the door. I walked up to it, checked the label I had written on the side in permanent marker. M. Quincy, calcium chloride, do not ingest. My bucket, my pellets. I was tempted to just take it back right then, but Wendy's voice echoed in my head about doing things properly. Instead, I took more photos, including close-ups of my handwriting on the label, and then I called her. She's using them, I said when Wendy answered. Brenda took my pellets and she's using them on the community trail. Are you serious? I'm looking at the bucket right now. It's got my name on it. Don't take it, Wendy said immediately. Just document everything. Photos, timestamps, the works. This is perfect evidence. Evidence for what? For when we escalate this. If she's confiscating property under the guise of HOA enforcement and then using it for her own purposes, that's not just theft anymore. That's fraud, potentially criminal conversion of property. I took more photos, including shots that showed the community center building in the background to establish location. A few people passed by while I was documenting everything, giving me curious looks but not stopping to ask questions. As I was finishing up, the community center door opened and Brenda walked out. She stopped dead when she saw me standing next to the bucket. Matthew, what are you doing here? Looking at my ice melt pellets that you confiscated from my property yesterday morning, I said, keeping my voice level. The ones you said were dangerous and unapproved. Her face flushed. Those pellets are being held by the HOA pending your approval request. They're being used on the community trail. I just walked the whole path. Those are calcium chloride pellets, Brenda. The exact same ones you told me I couldn't use on my own driveway. The community trail is different. We have different standards for shared spaces versus private property. That's not what you said yesterday. You said calcium chloride needed approval because of safety and environmental concerns. But apparently it's fine when you need it. Brenda picked up the bucket quickly. This conversation is over. You're trespassing on HOA property. The community center is open to all residents. It says so right on the door. Not when you're here to harass board members. She carried the bucket inside and closed the door firmly. I stood there for a moment, then walked home. I had what I needed. That evening, Wendy and I compiled everything. The photos, the Facebook posts, the certified letter I had sent, and the original receipt for the calcium chloride pellets. We wrote a detailed complaint to the Colorado HOA Information and Resource Center, outlining the property seizure, the inconsistent application of rules, and the apparent personal use of confiscated materials. You think anything will actually happen? I asked as we prepared the submission. Honestly, I don't know, but at least we're creating a paper trail. Wendy hit submit on the online form, and if the state doesn't help, we can take her to small claims court for the value of the pellets and our time. It's not even about the money, I said. It's the principle. She can't just do whatever she wants. The next week was tense. I received a response from the State Resource Center acknowledging my complaint and stating they would review it. The HOA, meanwhile, sent me a formal notice of violation for confrontational behavior toward board members related to my conversation with Brenda at the community center. The violation came with a $50 fine. I posted the notice on the Facebook group, and the response was overwhelmingly supportive. Other residents started sharing their own violation notices, many of them equally petty. Someone had been fined because their doormat was the wrong size. Another person was cited for having a garden hose visible from the street. Then Patricia, the woman who had first spotted my bucket on the trail, posted something interesting. Has anyone else noticed the concrete near the community center is looking rough? There are patches that look like the surface is flaking off. Several people confirmed they had seen the same thing. I walked over that evening to check it myself, and Patricia was right. The concrete path leading to the community center entrance and the area where the trail began showed visible damage. The surface was spalling, with chunks of the top layer flaking away and exposing the aggregate underneath. I took more photos and posted them to the group. This is what happens when you use too much calcium chloride on concrete. It accelerates the freeze-thaw cycle and causes surface deterioration. Frank commented, "Isn't that why some places limit what de-icers can be used?" He was right. I did some research that night and learned that while calcium chloride was effective at melting ice, it needed to be used correctly. Over-application, especially on new or improperly sealed concrete, could cause significant damage. The community center's concrete path looked relatively new, maybe 3 or 4 years old, and definitely wasn't sealed properly if the flaking I saw was any indication. Over the next few days, the concrete got worse. What started as minor flaking turned into serious spalling. Chunks of concrete were coming loose, leaving rough, uneven surfaces. The community trail, which had been smooth pavement just a week ago, was becoming a hazard. Other residents started noticing and commenting. The Facebook group exploded with posts about the deteriorating concrete, and people began connecting the dots to the aggressive ice melt application they had seen on the trail. Then Linda, one of the other board members, posted, "The board has received complaints about the community center path condition. We are investigating the cause and will take appropriate action to repair the damage." I commented, "The damage is likely from overuse of calcium chloride pellets. They're effective ice melt, but can deteriorate concrete if not applied properly." Brenda responded within minutes, "That is speculation and not helpful. Please refrain from making unfounded claims about community property maintenance." But the damage was becoming impossible to ignore. By the end of that week, the community center's path was bad enough that the HOA put up caution signs, and several residents reported nearly tripping on the uneven surface. The board called an emergency meeting for the following Tuesday evening. All residents were invited to attend. I marked my calendar immediately. The weekend brought more snow and more frustration. My driveway was a sheet of ice again despite my best efforts with rock salt. Wendy slipped while getting the mail and twisted her ankle, not badly but enough to hurt. She was livid. "This is exactly what you said would happen," she fumed, sitting on the couch with ice on her ankle. The irony of using ice to treat an injury caused by ice wasn't lost on me. That calcium chloride would have prevented this. I know. And Brenda used your pellets to destroy the community center concrete. Looks that way. Please tell me we're going to that meeting. We're absolutely going to that meeting. Tuesday arrived cold and clear. The community center's meeting room was packed when we arrived at 7. Every seat was taken and people lined the walls. The board sat at a table in front, Brenda in the middle with Linda and Susan on either side. 2 other board members, whose names I didn't know, flanked them. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss the recent concerns about the community center path and outline our repair plans." A man I didn't recognize raised his hand immediately. "Are we going to talk about what caused the damage?" "The damage appears to be weather-related," Brenda said smoothly. "The extreme cold this winter has affected the concrete." "That's not true," I said, standing up. All eyes turned to me. "The damage is from calcium chloride overuse." Brenda's expression hardened. "Matthew, you're out of order." "Please sit down." "No, I don't think I will." My heart was pounding, but I kept going. You confiscated calcium chloride pellets from my property last week, claiming they weren't approved for use. Then you used those same pellets on the community trail, and now the concrete is destroyed because they were over-applied. The room erupted in murmurs. Linda leaned over to whisper something to Brenda, who shook her head sharply. "That's a serious accusation," Brenda said, her voice tight. "And completely unfounded. I have photos." I pulled out my phone. Photos of my bucket with my name on it sitting outside this building. Photos of calcium chloride pellets on the trail. Photos of the progressive concrete damage over the past week. Patricia stood up. "I saw her using that bucket. I said so on Facebook." Frank stood next. "And I saw the bucket outside the community center too, a few days ago." More residents started speaking up, confirming they had seen the white bucket, seen someone spreading pellets on the trail, noticed the rapid deterioration of the concrete. Brenda's face was getting redder by the minute. "Even if calcium chloride was used, which I'm not confirming," Brenda said loudly over the crowd, "proper ice melt application should not cause this kind of damage." "Unless you massively over-applied it," I shot back. "Calcium chloride is hygroscopic. It draws moisture. When you use too much on unsealed concrete, especially in freeze-thaw conditions, it accelerates spalling. This is basic chemistry." One of the other board members, an older man whose nameplate read Richard, spoke up. "Brenda, did you use pellets on the trail?" "I maintained community property, which is my responsibility as president." "Did you use calcium chloride pellets?" Brenda didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "She took them from my property," I said. "Without permission, without a warrant, without any legal authority. She confiscated my pellets, told me they were unapproved and dangerous, and then used them herself. And now we're looking at thousands of dollars in concrete repairs." Linda whispered urgently to Brenda again. Susan looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Richard was frowning deeply. "I think we need to table this discussion," Richard said. "The board needs to review what happened and consult with legal counsel." "I agree," Susan said quickly. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outvoted. "Fine. This meeting is adjourned. We'll schedule another meeting once we've completed our internal review." The crowd wasn't happy with that, but people began filing out, clustering in small groups to discuss what had just happened. Wendy and I were approached by several neighbors who wanted to share their own HOA complaints and thank us for speaking up. "That took guts," one woman said. "Brenda's been getting away with this kind of thing for years." "Someone needed to stand up to her," another man added. "The board's been rubber stamping everything she wants." Frank pulled me aside. "Just so you know, Richard's actually reasonable. He's new to the board this year. I think he's realizing what a mess Brenda's created." We drove home that night feeling cautiously optimistic, but I knew this wasn't over. Brenda wasn't the type to back down easily. I was right. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It was a cease and desist, demanding I stop making defamatory statements about Brenda and the board. It threatened legal action if I continued to harass board members or spread false information about community property. I immediately scanned it and sent it to a lawyer friend, Derek, who lived in Denver. He called me back within an hour. "This is intimidation," Derek said. "Everything you've said is documented fact. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. They're trying to scare you into shutting up." "Is it working?" he laughed. "Should it be?" "No." "Good, send me everything you have. Photos, receipts, the original confiscation details, all of it. If they want to play legal games, we'll play. But Matt, I'm going to be honest with you, this could get expensive." "How expensive?" "If they actually sue you for defamation." Could be 20, 30,000 in legal fees even if you win. I felt sick. I don't have that kind of money just lying around. I know, which is why I'm going to write them a response pro bono as a friend. One lawyer to another, explaining exactly why their cease and desist is garbage and why they should back off before this gets ugly for them. You do that. You're not the first person who's dealt with an HOA power trip, and you won't be the last. Besides, I hate bullies. Derek's response letter went out 2 days later. In it, he meticulously outlined every factual statement I had made, provided timestamps and photo evidence, and politely explained that attempting to silence a homeowner from speaking facts at a public meeting was likely to result in a countersuit for violations of free speech and abuse of HOA authority. The letter concluded with a suggestion that the board might want to focus on repairing the damaged concrete and reviewing their property seizure policies rather than threatening residents with frivolous lawsuits. I didn't hear back from the HOA attorney after that. What I did hear, through the neighborhood grapevine and the Facebook group, was that the board was falling apart. Richard had apparently demanded a full accounting of how the calcium chloride pellets had been acquired and used. Susan was asking questions about other property confiscations. Linda was defending Brenda, but not very convincingly. Then the concrete got even worse. The freeze-thaw cycle was continuing, and every cold night followed by a slightly warmer day caused more damage. The community center path was now actively dangerous, with several residents reporting that they had tripped or stumbled on the uneven surface. Someone twisted their ankle badly enough to need medical attention. That incident triggered something unexpected. The injured resident, an elderly woman named Margaret, filed a claim against the HOA's insurance. Her medical bills were modest, but her lawyer sent a letter to the board asking pointed questions about the path maintenance and what had caused the damage. Insurance companies don't like liability questions. The HOA's insurer sent an inspector to assess the concrete damage, and according to Frank, who heard it from Richard's wife, the inspector's report was damning. The concrete showed clear signs of chemical damage consistent with calcium chloride overuse, and the path should have been properly sealed before any de-icing chemicals were applied. The insurance company informed the board that they might not cover the repairs because the damage was caused by improper maintenance, not normal wear and tear. The estimated repair cost was $43,000. The path needed to be completely torn out and replaced. The board called another meeting, this one mandatory for all homeowners. The community center was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. People were angry. Richard, not Brenda, opened the meeting. "Thank you all for coming. We need to discuss the community center path situation and how we're going to fund the necessary repairs." Brenda sat silently to the side, her expression stony. "As you all know, the path has sustained significant damage," Richard continued. "We've received an estimate of $43,000 to replace the affected sections. Our insurance will not cover this because the damage was caused by improper maintenance procedures." The room exploded in protests. "How did this happen?" someone shouted. "Who's responsible? Are you raising our HOA fees to pay for this?" Richard held up his hands. "Please, let me explain. After an internal review, the board has determined that calcium chloride pellets were used excessively on the path without proper consideration for the concrete's condition. The path had never been sealed, which made it vulnerable to chemical damage. Who applied the pellets?" a woman demanded. Richard looked uncomfortable. The board president, Brenda Palmer, applied the de-icing material personally. All eyes turned to Brenda. She stood up slowly, her face flushed. I was trying to keep the community safe, she said. The trail was icy and dangerous. I used what was available. You used pellets you confiscated from a resident, I said, standing again. Pellets you told me were too dangerous for use in the community. They were unapproved, but apparently fine when you needed them. This is ridiculous, Brenda snapped. I've been president of this HOA for 6 years. I've dedicated countless hours to this community. And now you're all turning on me because of some concrete damage. $43,000 worth of damage, someone called out, caused by your improper use of confiscated property. Another added. Richard spoke up again. The board has discussed this matter at length. We need to address both the immediate issue of the repairs and the larger concerns about HOA property seizure policies and president oversight. I move that we remove Brenda Palmer as president, a man in the back said loudly. I recognized him as Tom from the hardware store. Seconded, multiple voices called out. Brenda's face went from red to pale. You can't do that. Board elections are in November. Actually, Richard said, pulling out a document, according to our HOA bylaws, Section 18, a special election can be called if 20% of homeowners petition for it, or if a majority of board members vote for a recall. We have over 20% here tonight, Tom said. Let's vote right now. The meeting devolved into procedural chaos for a while as people debated whether an impromptu vote was legal, whether there was a quorum, and what the bylaws actually said about emergency removals. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed, and it was decided that a formal petition would be circulated for signatures, followed by a special election in 2 weeks. But Brenda's power was effectively broken that night. Even Linda, her main supporter, was noticeably quiet during the discussions about how to fund the concrete repairs without raising HOA fees. After the meeting, several residents approached me to apologize for not standing up to Brenda sooner. We all knew she was out of control, one man said. But nobody wanted to be the one to challenge her. I'm just tired of the petty tyranny, I replied. This was never about ice melt. It's about people using small amounts of power to make other people's lives miserable. The petition to remove Brenda got the required signatures within 48 hours. The Facebook group was buzzing with activity as people shared stories of her various abuses of power over the years. The garden gnome confiscations, the ridiculous paint color requirements, the excessive fines for minor violations. Someone discovered that Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay herself a monthly administrative fee that had never been approved by the homeowners. It was only $200 a month, but over 6 years, it added up to over $14,000. That discovery prompted someone to call the police. I wasn't involved in that decision, but I can't say I was unhappy when I saw the Aurora Police Department car parked outside the community center 3 days later. The investigation into HOA financial impropriety apparently fell under the jurisdiction of the Colorado Attorney General's Office for Potential Embezzlement. The police were there to collect records and interview board members. I watched from a distance as Brenda arrived at the community center, saw the police car, and nearly turned around to leave before an officer called out to her. They spoke for several minutes, then went inside together. Wendy grabbed my arm. Is this really happening? I think it is. Over ice melt pellets. Over abuse of power, I corrected. The pellets were just the tip of the iceberg. The special election happened 2 weeks later as scheduled. Brenda didn't even show up. She had submitted a resignation letter to the board 3 days earlier, citing health concerns and the stress of false accusations. Richard was elected as the new president. Tom from the hardware store joined the board as a new member. The first order of business was returning my bucket of calcium chloride pellets, which had been found in the community center storage closet, still 3/4 full. Richard brought it to my house personally, along with a formal letter of apology from the board. "I'm sorry this happened," he said, setting the bucket in my garage. "Brenda was out of control and the rest of us didn't stop her soon enough." "Is the criminal investigation going anywhere?" I asked. "I honestly don't know. The Attorney General's office is reviewing the financial records. Whether they'll charge her with anything is beyond my pay grade." Richard shook his head. The self-payments were clearly improper, but proving criminal intent might be difficult. "What about the concrete repairs?" "We're taking out a loan that will be paid back over 3 years with a small, temporary increase in HOA fees, about $20 a month per household. The membership voted and approved it." He smiled wryly. "Turns out people are much more willing to pay when they trust the board not to waste their money." The concrete repairs began in early March when the weather warmed enough to work with concrete. The contractor tore out the damaged sections and replaced them with properly sealed, high-quality concrete. Signs were posted warning residents not to use any chemical de-icers on the new surface for the first year while it cured. The Attorney General's investigation took longer. I followed it through occasional updates on the local news and from Richard, who kept me informed as the board received official correspondence. The investigation uncovered that Brenda had taken several other administrative fees beyond the monthly payments, usually reimbursing herself for expenses that were questionable at best. In total, she had taken about $19,000 from the HOA over 6 years. In June, criminal charges were filed. Brenda Palmer was charged with theft, embezzlement, and misconduct in office. The local news picked up the story and it made for sensational headlines. "HOA president charged with embezzlement after ice melt scandal" was my personal favorite. The legal process ground forward slowly. Brenda pleaded not guilty initially, but as the evidence mounted and her legal bills grew, she eventually agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges of theft and agreed to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus damages for the concrete repairs. Her sentence included 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. She also had to pay a $10,000 fine. It was September by the time everything was finalized. The summer had been remarkably peaceful in Meadowbrook Hills under Richard's leadership. The board had revised the bylaws to limit presidential power, require financial audits, and most importantly, eliminate any language that could be interpreted as allowing property seizures without due process. I was in my garage one Saturday afternoon, organizing my winter supplies when Frank wandered over with a beer. "Getting ready for winter already?" he asked. "Just being prepared." I pointed to the shelf where I had stored the calcium chloride pellets, rock salt, sand, and a backup scraper. "Not taking any chances this year." "Did you see Brenda's house is for sale?" I had seen the sign go up a few weeks earlier. "Yeah, can't blame her for wanting a fresh start somewhere else." Think she learned anything from all this? I considered that. Probably not. People like her rarely do. But at least she can't hurt anyone in our neighborhood anymore. Frank raised his beer. "I'll drink to that." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the late summer sun paint the Colorado sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere down the street, kids were playing basketball. Someone was grilling and the smell of burgers drifted on the breeze. "You know what's funny?" I said eventually. "All of this, everything that happened, started because I wanted to keep my driveway safe. That's it. Just wanted to melt some ice." And ended with criminal charges and HOA reform, Frank added. Life's weird like that. Wendy came out of the house with her own drink. Are you two having a moment, just reflecting on the great ice melt scandal of 2025? I said, putting my arm around her. Her ankle had healed up fine, though she still complained about it when the weather changed. I still can't believe it got as crazy as it did, she said. When you came home that first day saying Brenda took your pellets, I thought it would just be a minor HOA annoyance. Like a strongly worded letter at worst. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, Frank quoted, and we all laughed. But he was right. None of us could have predicted how a simple bucket of ice melt pellets would expose years of financial misconduct, abuse of power, and HOA overreach. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. Derek had helped for free, but we'd still spent money on certified letters, documentation, and taking time off work for meetings and proceedings. Yet standing there in my driveway on that September evening, I felt like it had been worth it. Our neighborhood was better now. The board was accountable. The rules made sense. And most importantly, residents knew they could speak up without fear of retaliation. The trial and sentencing had made local news, which led to a state representative reaching out to Richard about sponsoring new legislation to provide better oversight of HOAs in Colorado. The representative was particularly interested in clarifying rules around property seizures and financial accountability. Richard had asked me to provide testimony about my experience if the legislation moved forward. I had agreed immediately. If my stupid ice melt story could help fix a broken system, even a little, then all the stress and frustration would have a purpose beyond just our community. Winter came again, as it always does in Colorado. The first real snowfall arrived in late October, earlier than usual. I was ready this time. I had my calcium chloride pellets properly stored and labeled. I had rock salt for less extreme conditions. I had a detailed plan for which product to use in which weather conditions. And I had a new appreciation for how important it was to stand up for yourself, even over something as seemingly trivial as ice melt. The driveway was clear within an hour of the snow stopping, the calcium chloride doing its job efficiently and effectively. No excessive application, no damage to the concrete, just safe, ice-free surfaces. I made sure to document my usage in a little notebook, just in case anyone ever questioned my methods again. But no one did. The new board trusted residents to maintain their properties responsibly. Violations were only issued for genuinely hazardous or grossly negligent situations. And even then, homeowners got warnings and opportunities to correct issues before any fines were assessed. It was, in short, how an HOA was supposed to work. One evening in December, almost a year after the whole saga began, I was clearing snow again when I noticed someone watching from a car parked down the street. My first thought was paranoia, a holdover from the tense months of dealing with Brenda. But as I looked closer, I realized it was just a prospective buyer checking out the neighborhood with their realtor. Frank came out and saw me staring. House hunters, looks like it. That's the third one this week. Word's gotten out that Meadowbrook Hills cleaned up its act. Property values are actually going up, Frank grinned. All thanks to your ice melt pellets. I'm getting that printed on a t-shirt. We both laughed, but there was truth in what he said. The neighborhood had changed fundamentally. New families were moving in, attracted by the reasonable HOA policies and community involvement. The Facebook group had transformed from a battlefield into an actual community forum where people shared recommendations, organized events, and helped each other. The community center path looked beautiful, the new concrete pristine and properly maintained. The board had hired a professional service to handle snow and ice removal on all common areas, with strict guidelines about proper chemical use and concrete protection. It had cost money, slightly higher HOA fees, but residents had voted overwhelmingly in favor. Better to pay a little more and have things done right than deal with another expensive disaster. Brenda's house finally sold in January, a full year and a week after she had confiscated my pellets. I never saw her again after the court proceedings, and I was fine with that. I hoped she found some peace wherever she went, and more importantly, I hoped she stayed far away from any position of power over other people. The new owners who bought her house were a young couple with a baby. They introduced themselves to everyone on the block within the first week, brought cookies, and asked intelligent questions about the neighborhood. When they asked about the HOA, I gave them an honest answer. "It's good now," I said, "but it wasn't always. If you ever have concerns or see something wrong, speak up immediately. Don't let small abuses of power go unchecked." The husband nodded seriously. "We heard there was some drama last year. You could say that." I gave them the abbreviated version, hitting the main points without dwelling on the details. They listened with wide eyes. "Over ice melt," the wife said when I finished. "That's insane." "It wasn't really about ice melt," I explained. "It was about someone who thought rules gave them unlimited power. The ice melt was just where I personally drew the line." "Well, we're glad you did," the husband said. "The realtor told us this neighborhood had great HOA management, and that's rare. Sounds like you're part of why." After they left, Wendy came outside, making friends with the new neighbors, telling war stories. "You're going to be telling that story for years, aren't you?" "Probably. It's a good story." She kissed my cheek. "It is. And you were right to stand up to her, even though I was worried it would backfire." "It almost did, but it didn't. That's what matters." That night, I sat in my home office and wrote down the whole experience in detail, from that first morning when Brenda confiscated my pellets to the final court sentencing, and everything in between. I figured it might be useful someday, either as a cautionary tale or as evidence if similar situations arose. But more than that, I wanted to remember, not just the conflict and stress, but the good parts too. The way neighbors came together. The way speaking truth to power actually worked sometimes. The way broken systems could be fixed if enough people cared. The document ended up being almost 20 pages long. I saved it, backed it up in 3 places, and sent a copy to Derek with a thank you note for his help. He replied, "Great work. You should post this online. Other people dealing with HOA problems might find it useful." I thought about that for a while. The idea of sharing such a personal and frustrating experience with strangers was uncomfortable, but Derek was right. If my story could help someone else stand up to an abusive HOA, or better yet, prevent someone from becoming a Brenda in the first place, wasn't that worth a little discomfort? I posted it on a few HOA reform forums and Reddit communities dedicated to homeowner association problems. The response was overwhelming. Within days, I had hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories, asking for advice, or just thanking me for speaking out. Several news outlets reached out asking for interviews. I did a few, always emphasizing the same points. HOAs serve important purposes when run properly, but they need oversight and accountability. Homeowners need to be involved and vigilant, and small abuses of power, if left unchecked, inevitably lead to bigger problems. The state legislation Richard had mentioned gained traction, partly due to the publicity around Brenda's case. The proposed law would require HOAs in Colorado to undergo annual independent audits, provide homeowners with clearer paths to dispute violations, and strictly limit an HOA's ability to seize property or levy fines without proper notice and appeal processes. I testified before a state committee in March, telling my story in a formal setting for the first time. It was nerve-wracking, standing in front of state representatives and lawyers and advocates, explaining how a bucket of ice melt had exposed systemic problems in HOA governance. But they listened. They asked good questions. And most importantly, they understood that my experience wasn't unique, just unusually well documented. The legislation passed in May with bipartisan support. The governor signed it in June at a ceremony where several homeowners who had fought their own HOA battles were present. I shook the governor's hand and posed for photos, feeling surreal about the whole thing. "You started something important," the governor told me. "Thank you for having the courage to speak up." I wanted to say that I hadn't been courageous, just stubborn and annoyed about my ice melt, but I understood what she meant. Sometimes courage is just refusing to accept things that are wrong, even when it's easier to stay quiet. Back in Meadowbrook Hills, life continued peacefully under Richard's steady leadership. The board expanded to 7 members to prevent any one person from having too much control. Monthly meetings were well attended and productive. The community center became an actual center of community activity, hosting events and classes and gatherings. Frank organized a neighborhood barbecue in July, and almost everyone came. Kids ran around playing while adults talked and laughed and shared food. Someone brought up the Brenda situation, as inevitably happened at any gathering, but the conversation was brief and quickly moved on to other topics. We were more than that scandal now. We were a real community. In August, I got a letter from the Attorney General's office informing me that the final restitution payment had been received, and the case was officially closed. Brenda had paid back every dollar she had taken, plus the cost of the concrete repairs, plus penalties and interest. The HOA's accounts were whole again. I filed the letter away with all the other documents from that long, strange year. Part of me wanted to burn the whole pile, to finally let go of the frustration and anger I had carried through those difficult months. But I kept them instead, a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, and that sometimes the smallest things can spark the biggest changes. Winter approached again, and I found myself actually looking forward to it. I had my ice melt supplies ready, my snow removal equipment maintained, and my driveway properly sealed to protect against chemical damage. I was prepared. More than that, I knew my neighbors had my back. If another Brenda ever came along, if another petty tyrant tried to use HOA rules as weapons, we would stand together. We had learned that lesson well. The first snow fell in mid-November, a light dusting that barely required any ice melt at all. I still went out and cleared it properly, using just enough calcium chloride to keep the driveway safe without overdoing it. Old habits die hard, I suppose, but at least these were good habits. As I was finishing up, the couple who had bought Brenda's house came outside with their baby, now almost a year old and bundled up in a snowsuit. The kid was seeing snow for the first time, touching it with wonder, and both parents were taking endless photos. "First snow," I called over. "For her, yeah," the dad replied. "We're from Arizona originally. This is all new." "Welcome to Colorado winters. Need any advice on ice melt?" They both laughed, knowing the story. "We stocked up on everything the hardware store recommended," the mom said. "We're not taking any chances after hearing what happened." "Smart," I hefted my bucket. "Just remember, a little goes a long way. More isn't always better." "Words to live by," the dad agreed. I watched them go back inside. their baby babbling happily about the cold white stuff falling from the sky. New families, new stories, new memories being made. The neighborhood was moving forward, growing and changing while keeping the lessons of the past alive. That evening, Wendy and I sat by our fireplace, watching the snow fall outside our window. It was peaceful, quiet, exactly the kind of winter evening I had imagined when we first bought the house in Meadowbrook Hills. "You regret it?" Wendy asked suddenly. "All the stress and fighting and legal stuff. Would you have just let her keep the pellets if you had known how big it would get?" I thought about that seriously. "No," I finally said. "I don't regret it. It needed to happen. Maybe not over ice melt specifically, but someone needed to stand up to her eventually. I'm just glad it worked out the way it did. And if it hadn't worked out, if the board had backed her, or if she'd successfully sued you for defamation, or any of the other ways it could have gone wrong, then at least I would have tried. At least I wouldn't have just accepted being pushed around in my own home." Wendy squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you. I was terrified through most of it, worried we'd lose everything over a stupid fight with the HOA, but I'm proud you stood your ground." "We stood our ground," I corrected. "You were with me every step." We sat there together as the snow continued to fall, covering the neighborhood in a blanket of white. Somewhere out there, other people were probably dealing with their own HOA problems, their own petty tyrants, their own frustrating battles over things that should be simple and straightforward. I hoped they would stand up for themselves too. I hoped they would find their own courage, their own support systems, their own paths through the bureaucratic nightmare that HOAs could become when run by the wrong people. But most of all, I hoped they wouldn't need to. I hoped that Brenda's story and stories like it would serve as warnings to anyone tempted to abuse the small powers that came with HOA leadership. I hoped that boards would choose accountability over control, community over conformity, and common sense over rigid rules. The snow fell through the night, and by morning, everything was white and clean and beautiful. I grabbed my calcium chloride pellets and went out to clear the driveway, working efficiently and carefully, using just enough product to keep us safe. The bucket was still 3/4 full, just as it had been when Richard returned it. Those pellets had been at the center of everything, the catalyst that exposed corruption and changed a community. But in the end, they were just chemicals in a bucket, tools to be used properly and responsibly. The real lesson hadn't been about ice melt at all. It had been about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. About community coming together to fix broken systems. About the importance of accountability and transparency in any organization, no matter how small. As I spread the last handful of pellets across my driveway, I looked around at the neighborhood I had fought so hard to protect and improve. It was home, truly home, in a way it hadn't been when Brenda was in charge. We weren't just people living in the same development anymore. We were neighbors who looked out for each other, who stood together against injustice, who had learned that silence in the face of wrong was the same as acceptance. And all because I had refused to let someone take my ice melt pellets without a fight. I laughed at the absurdity of it all as I put the bucket back in my garage. Life was strange sometimes, full of unexpected turns and consequences nobody could predict. But that was okay. The strangeness made it interesting, and the struggles made the victories meaningful. Frank appeared from his house across the street, already dressed for work. "Driveway looking good," he called over. "Thanks. Yours too. Same time, same method, right? You know it." He waved and got in his car, heading off to start his day. I went inside to do the same, leaving behind a clean driveway and a neighborhood that worked the way it was supposed to. The calcium chloride pellets sat in my garage, properly stored and ready for the next snowfall. They were just pellets, nothing more. But they represented something bigger now. A reminder that sometimes the smallest stand against injustice can create the biggest change. And as I got ready for work, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time when thinking about my HOA: contentment. We had fixed what was broken. We had stood up to abuse of power. We had made our community better, all because I had refused to accept that someone could just take my property, use it for themselves, and face no consequences. All because I believed that rules should apply equally to everyone, including those in charge. All because I had decided that enough was enough. The story of the ice melt pellets would be told and retold in Meadowbrook Hills for years to come. I was sure of that. It would become neighborhood legend, probably growing more dramatic with each telling. But the core truth would remain. When people come together to demand accountability and fight injustice, change is possible, even over something as simple as ice melt pellets.